Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast Control or Be Controlled, a podcast designed to help you start thinking differently, taking control of your life, and self improvement as well. I remain your humble host, Darlington Obuka. Today's guest is Karen Uslin, a cultural historian and researcher whose work explores identity, heritage, and the stories that shape who we are. Karen's work focuses on helping people make sense of identity when family histories are fragmented, missing, or difficult to trace, especially in contexts like adoption, migration, and displacement. She currently serves as Director of Research for the Defiant Requiem Foundation and teaches at the Catholic University of America and Stockton University. What makes Karen's perspective especially powerful is that this work is also deeply personal. As an adoptee herself, she understands firsthand what it means to piece together a sense of self from incomplete or hidden history. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Karen. So before we get into it, Karen, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. I'm Dr. Karen Uslin, and my full-time job is as Director of Research for the Defiant Requiem Foundation, which focuses on music and performance and education of music from the Holocaust, and using cultural arts to combat religious hatred, anti-Semitism, etc. And then in addition to that, I also teach at Catholic University, and primarily my work is as a cultural historian who focuses on aspects of heritage and legacy, memory, and identity. As you said, when those stories are incomplete, whether that's due to war, migration, adoption, genocide, whatever the case may be. Looking into those fragmented histories to try and piece them back together.
Thank you, Karen. Karen, when I read about you, about what you are doing, who you are, and your work, I was very, very happy to have you on this podcast because a lot of questions I have for you, they are particular to myself and to my audience as well. So let's get into it. About identity. What does it mean to understand your identity when key parts of your personal or family history are missing?
I think the first thing is that the one thing I always tell people when they start off on these journeys, if you're trying to piece together information, and whether that's as an individual, as an organization, whatever the case may be, that first off, identity is ever evolving. It's not the kind of thing where you suddenly get answers and your identity is fully formed and it will never change. Identity is always growing and always changing. So the more pieces you learn, the more that expands your understanding of identity. But that journey is a lifelong journey. I can say for myself, even though as an adoptee, I found out much of my biological history, that doesn't mean that I feel that my journey is complete. There are always questions. There are always new things to learn. There are always new things to look at. So I think, don't believe that just because the pieces aren't there means you don't have an identity, but also don't believe that finding the answers you're seeking means that your identity is done growing.
Okay, Karen, let's talk about adoption. I know that adoption is something that is very, very personal to you. So how does adoption shape
Yes.
a person's sense of identity and belonging over time?
I think it didn't necessarily affect me so much when I was younger. So my story is I was a newborn adoptee. So my mom and dad that raised me took me right home from the hospital after I was born. So I didn't grow up necessarily feeling fragmented over my identity because I very much took the culture and things I was raised with as my own, and I still do consider those my own. But I think as I got older, what I realized is that there were parts of my story that other people knew that I did not. That is really where, for me, questions of identity or the desire to learn more about my identity really really surfaced, because I wanted to know what were those stories that other people knew that I did not. And that was kind of what really led me to start figuring out those pieces. Um, And that was kind of why I decided to take the journey that I did, because whatever the pieces were, and even if I couldn't find all of them, I wanted to at least own the pieces that I had access to.
Okay, Karen, that's wonderful. So why do so many people run into dead ends when researching their family history, and how can they move past them?
Yeah, so, in the case of adoption, a lot of times the dead ends are that, especially with closed adoptions from the 50s through 1950s through 1980s. So I was born in 1982, so my adoption was closed. A lot of times and in a lot of places, those records just aren't necessarily easily available. Sometimes they're sealed and you need a court order. Sometimes even a court order won't allow you to get access to those records. So that's where that can get tricky. Um, as far as other cases, migration, or especially in cases such as war, genocide, sometimes, the members of your family that could fill in those pieces are lost. And sometimes you're looking for records in places where records are not easy to find or maybe lost. Obviously in war, records get lost. There are a lot of cases where even if the records are available, they haven't been digitized yet. And so then you have to know kind of where to go to find those records and who to contact and how to contact them. And so it's little, it seems minor things in the long run, but those are really some of the biggest stumbling blocks that people have when they're trying to find information.
Okay, Karen, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So in what ways do war, migration, and displacement affect what we know or don't know about our families?
Well, I mean, in all of those cases, what happens is that families are broken up. In the cases of things like migration or immigration, it means that parts of the family are leaving one place and going to another. And especially if they did this in the, 18th, 19th, early 20th century, it's not the kind of thing where we had internet or WhatsApp or Skype or whatever the technology may be. A lot of times in those cases, you were leaving that, that family that was going off was family that you may never see or hear from again. In the case of war, I think it's a little different because war, not only are families getting fragmented, but whole ecosystems and whole, geographic locations are getting fragmented. And so in those cases, it's a little more difficult because you really have a tearing to the core, to the foundation, not only of personal identity or family identity, but also, ethnic or racial or national identity, whatever the case may be for you personally. And so that can be really difficult because then a lot of times the people who could give you the answers to those identity questions may no longer be here. They may no longer be accessible, and whatever documentation they had may no longer be accessible.
Okay. So how important is cultural heritage in shaping how we understand ourselves today?
Cultural heritage obviously that term can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me, I think I always looked at it as sort of the, what surrounded the people who made me the person that I am. So this is why I said not only do I, count my biological heritage, but also the heritage I was raised with, I very much count. And so for me, it's always okay. Cultural heritage is ultimately it's a human story. It's a story of humanity. And so what surrounded those human beings that created that cultural heritage? What was the culture that surrounded these people that ultimately made me the person that I am, or my family the people that they were, or my, state, my country, my city, the world, what it is. And so I think for me, that's what cultural heritage does, is it gives me insight into the people who made me the person that I am.
So for someone who feels disconnected from their past, where is a good place to begin reconnecting with their history?
I think the first thing I always tell people is you have to figure out what you don't know. I think it's very easy for, big things that you can think of off the top of your head to be unknown. But what I had to do was I sort of had to really sit down and go, okay, this is what I know. This is what I don't know. And then once you sort of know what you don't know, it's a little easier to go about finding that information. So if I knew, okay, I don't know exactly what my ethnicity background is. So for me, then it was, okay, I'm going to take an ancestry DNA test and start putting that piece together. Then it was, okay, I don't really know from my biological family's end what the situation was with my adoption. So then once I, got the ancestry DNA test and was able to see who I matched with and figure things out from that, then I had the people to contact to kind of put that other piece together. As far as things like culture, that's a little easier because you can read books, you can listen to music, you can look at artwork, you can watch theater shows, you can go on YouTube and watch TV clips of TV shows, etc., that give you an idea into sort of the larger culture. But when you're looking at personal identity, you really first have to sort of find what you don't know. And then once you can see it and visualize it, then it's easier to sort of put down the steps of, okay, this is the steps and this is the information I would need to fill that hole. And then you can start to move into physical action of getting those pieces together.
Karen, I know you have made some interesting and surprising and meaningful as well discoveries in your research. So can you walk us through the most surprising or the most meaningful discoveries you have made in your research?
I mean, I think for me, one of the most surprising and meaningful discoveries that I found personally was that I had a full biological sister. Because for a lot of adoptees, I think you think, your biological parents, especially if they were young, they were young, they, couldn't take care of a baby. They give that baby up for adoption. They go their separate ways, get married, have families. You could have, a half dozen half siblings running around in the world, which is what I thought. And then I found out that I had one sibling who was a full biological sister. And that was one of the things that really ended up rocking my world. That was I mean, in the best way possible, that was a shock. Um, and the other side probably would have to do a little bit more with actually the cultural heritage part. So for me personally, as an academic and in my career, the part of the world that I always specialized in was Eastern Europe. I'm a Holocaust and genocide studies expert. And, obviously when you're talking Holocaust in Eastern Europe, you're talking a lot about the decimation of the Jewish population and the study of minority groups who were persecuted in that part of the world. And so when I started digging into my biological East European background, which I knew I had East European, but I wasn't sure what it was. And I come to find out that my East European heritage is what is called Ruthenian or Carpatho-Rusin, which is a specific ethnic group from the Carpathian Mountain region in Eastern Europe, who also happen to be a minority people that were persecuted by various governments throughout history. And it was very interesting because that's what I just spent, 20 some years of my life devoted to. And then to find out that that also is my background, a different ethnic group, but the same result was a bit of a shock. And so, it's things like that that I think turn out being some of the big things that once you find them out, you really got to sit and sort of make sure you give yourself the grace and the time to process them, because those are life-changing and they're incredibly big revelations.
So when you are faced with incomplete or conflicting historical records, how do you work with them without losing clarity or direction?
I think once you figure out what you don't know, then I would say the first thing you have to do is kind of figure out, what do you want to know first? Is it that you want to know more about a specific aspect of your ancestral or ethnicity background? Is it in a case of adoption that you want to find biological information? Is it in a case where you're from a place or have a family history that includes, war or migration, and you want to find out what those roots are? Then you figure out exactly what point you want to start at. So if it's something where it's about going to find physical documentation, then we figure out where do you go to get the documentation and what is the process to get documentation. If it's the kind of thing where, you want to just sort of learn general, or not general, but, you want to learn cultural information broadly, what are the best resources out there for you to learn about the history or the music or the literature or whatever it may be of your cultural identity. So it really is kind of, getting the list together and then figuring out exactly where you want to start, that then you break it down piece by piece and see what the process is for each piece that you're trying to find out.
So for the present moment, Karen, what can family history teach us about resilience and identity in the present?
I mean, I think ultimately, no matter what your what your family history is, you go back in time and resilience was the name of the game. People were surviving in situations where they didn't have the technology or the modern medicine or the modern amenities that we have today. Um, they were really fighting a good fight in a lot of ways. They were doing amazing things with so much less than what we have access to today. And so I think, one of the things that I love about looking in family histories is you really find strong people and you find strong individuals. And I think that also is a great inspiration, for us now in times where, we may feel like things are tough or we're not sure how things are going to, to turn out. It's amazing to sort of look back and go, these were strong people that I come from. And if they can make it through, I can make it through.
Okay, thank you very much. For someone who feels overwhelmed by their own family history, what first step would you suggest they take?
I think, honestly, I think the very first step in any of this also, even more than, figuring out what you need to find out, you also have to go into it with an open mind. You have to know going into it that you may find out some wonderful things, you may find out some not so wonderful things. But you have to be willing to accept your truth. Whatever you find out and whatever the end result is, that's your truth. And you have to be okay with knowing and owning your truth and being able to, rise with the truth. Um, you have to go in knowing that there could be, it's normally not all going to be amazing or all going to be bad. There's going to be some wonderful stuff. There's going to be some tough stuff. So you have to be okay with that scenario. And I would always tell people, don't start digging until you are okay with that scenario, because otherwise you're going to make it a lot tougher on yourself. So the biggest thing that I could say is go in with an open mind and understand that anything is possible. And, and this is where I kind of came down on, for me personally, it was the type of thing where I went, okay, even if it's not quite the way I would want it to be in my head, knowing the truth and being able to know my truth was more important to me than being afraid of the truth.
So, Karen, this particular question I have for you is really, really personal. So,
Okay.
do you think people can rise above their family identity and pattern?
Do you think people can write a book?
Can rise above, like
Oh, rise above.
break their family
Yeah.
pattern and identity?
Yeah. I definitely think I definitely think you can. I think it's all what you do with it. I think for me, learning the various pieces of both my family and my biological family's identities and, learning kind of what made them the people they are, it gave me better understanding of why they've kind of operated through life the way that they have. And not that I may necessarily, agree or disagree with that. but it gave me the baseline understanding of, okay, this is why they are the way they are. And then, it's the kind of thing where if you know that that's not the road you want to go, you know now what not to do. I think there's no situation in which people cannot rise above. It's just that you have to have the willingness and the patience to be able to walk through the hard part to get to the other side. And the way that you do that is by, in my case, it was making sure that I was surrounded by really amazing people that could support on my way through. And sometimes even with that, you still have to dig deep. But, for me, I think it was that road to travel, I knew at the end was going to be worth it. And so I was willing to take that journey. And I think sometimes the hardest thing is just taking the first step in the journey. And once you do that and you're on your way, it's a lot easier to keep walking.
So for someone like me who tried as much as possible to run away from the identity of my dad, and after all these years, I discovered that I had never run away. I had been with my dad for a very long time without knowing. And I'm sure that a lot of my audience who are out there who has tried to break out from their family identity, but the more they try, the more they find themselves in that same identity they try to break out from.
Yeah.
So I want to know, is there something that you could, maybe something that you think they are missing out, or a place that they are mixing it, that they are not getting it right? That is why the more they try to run away from their identity, the more they find themselves in that same identity.
Yeah, and I think, it's understandable. I mean, I had some things in my family history too, both my biological parents and my biological father's side of the family. There was a lot of history of addiction and different things. And I think it's the kind of thing, people will say when you keep running away from something, it will catch up with you. I think it's more, it's always going to feel like a weight on your shoulders the more you run away from it. I think I had to, I had to just sort of, I think for me, it's just a matter of I found more peace with that aspect of things in understanding why people turned out the way they did. Once I could kind of see all the pieces of why someone would be the person that they are, then it made it easier for me to understand what the journey was. And I've had that, with certain family members where it might have been a tough thing to try and figure out, why did this person do this, or why did they end up doing this, or, why did they end up being this person that affected me like X, Y, and Z in my childhood? And once I understood why, then it became okay. I can't change what happened, but I can understand and accept why they became the way that they did. And for me personally, that was really what helped me to kind of step up and to sort of overcome those difficulties was the understanding of the why. And it's not to say that you're going to change someone. It's not to say that understanding the why magically makes everything better. But I think what it does is it gives you a full picture in a way that is very hard to do when you're in the thick of it. When you're in the middle of the tornado, even if you're in the eye of the tornado, it's very difficult to see through everything whirling around you. But when you can kind of step out of that and sort of do an overhead and see all the different parts of everything, it makes it a little easier to understand. And I think with understanding comes growth. So to me, that's ultimately the way that you kind of rise above that. The more you understand, the more that you can grow. And the more that you can grow, the more that you can accept the pieces as they are.
Okay, thank you, Karen. My final question for you is this. How has your own experience as an adoptee shaped the way you approach your work and understand other people's stories.
I think especially when I work with adoptees, obviously, there's a sort of mutual understanding in that sense. But I will say, even with that, everybody's story is different. Everybody reacts to their story differently. Everybody feels different things about their story. So the one thing is, I can absolutely understand from the perspective of wanting to find your story, wanting to understand it. But, I would never say that every adoptee feels the exact same way that I do, or that they're going to approach things exactly the way that I do. So the one thing I would say is that it's helped with my sympathy and my empathy. But it also doesn't mean that I'm going to make assumptions on how somebody thinks or feels either.
Okay. So thank you very much for being my guest on this particular episode. It's a pleasure to have you here, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So before you go, where can my audience learn more about you or about your work?
So the two easiest places would be at the website for the organization I work for, www.defiantrequiem.org, or you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Okay. So thank you, Karen. Thank you very much once again. Thank you for sharing your insights and deeply meaningful work you do around identity, history, and belonging. It's my pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to everyone who's listening out there, your story is still unfolding, and even the missing pieces can lead you somewhere powerful when you choose to keep asking the right questions. And thankfully, our guest has made it very easy for us, and she has given us a nice step and nice procedures to follow to achieve this. Until next time, see you again on the next episode. Take control or be controlled. See you guys later.